So I invite you to open up to Ecclesiastes 12, and after now, I think this is our 18th week in Ecclesiastes. We are coming to a close, and you could view today as kind of the final arguments, if you will, of this big point that Solomon has been building throughout all of Ecclesiastes, as he's looking at all of life and saying that if you try to live this life without God, you will be disappointed. You will be left unfulfilled. You will be frustrated by life itself, and ultimately you find life to be meaningless if life is all we have. And he's looked at a lot of things up to now. He's looked at money. He's looked at possessions. He's looked at wisdom. He's looked at relationships. He's looked at jobs. Everything you experience in life is pointless if there is no God. But as we'll be talking about today, life itself and everything that comes with it is also pointless without God. Essentially, if all we have is life, then the goal is to live as long as possible. And living a long life is a blessing in and of itself. It's a good goal to have. But the longer you live, the harder it gets. And as we read this text today, it can seem depressing. It can seem morbid when we talk about aging and we talk about death, but the key to understanding all of this are going to be the first three words we're about to read. Remember your Creator. And that is the true focus of all of this, that from the young to the old and everything in between, that life itself is a gift from a loving Creator. And our purpose is not simply to live, but to remember Him while we are alive. And so we're going to read all of these verses now, verses 1 through 8. I won't have them up on the screen to start because we are going to have them up one by one as we go through. But I invite you to open up there now, Ecclesiastes 12. Let's read together verses 1 through 8. Remember your Creator and the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark and the clouds return after the rain. When the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop. When the grinders cease because they are few and those looking through the windows grow dim. When the doors to the street are closed and the sound of the grinding fades. When people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. When people are afraid of heights and the dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire no longer is stirred, then people go to their eternal home and mourners go about the streets. Remember Him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Those first three words are going to be important to understanding everything we just read, because you could read this and say, man, what's the point of anything at all? But the point is spelled out clearly. Remember your Creator. Remember Him if you're young. Remember Him if you're old. If today is a day you are living, remember Him in it. And He makes this kind of journey through life from youth to old age to death, and how these spots are all meaningful in their own ways. But He starts with an important point that we have to understand as people, and most of us have, that youth is fleeting. Right? Life goes fast, and there's certainly an advantage to being young in many things, but it is not forever. But while you are young, don't waste your life chasing selfish things. Remember your Creator now, before the days of trouble come. Now, many people think that the point of life is to understand that youth is important, youth is advantageous, and so we are to stay young as long as possible. And there's certain things you can do to make life easier. You can diet, you can exercise, you can take care of yourself, but no matter how much you try, you can't stay young forever. You can try to look young, but there is a certain point in which you won't look young. It'll look like you're trying to look young, right? And things just kind of move, and every part of life kind of goes on to the point in which you realize you're just not young anymore. So the command here is not stay young. The command through all of the text today that's going to be repeated again later is remember your Creator, because life just kind of goes, and it goes quickly. And most of us at any age are going to look back and say, where's the time gone? And I remember when I was 16, I get my driver's license and I'm like, wow, I am 16. Like, where is the time gone? And it did the same thing when I turned 20 and 22 when I got married and when I turned 30. And there's this time you just look back and you say, where has the time gone? And as I'm raising kids, you realize like the time between diapers and diploma goes really fast. And I just had a moment this morning during the worship set where my 6.5-year-old son wants to be picked up. He's not feeling well today. And in my mind, I'm like, he's too old for this. I was like, you know what? There'll be a time really soon where I'll want to pick him up, and I physically can't. He probably won't want to. It's like, you have to understand these things are here for a moment, and they're gone. And I'm realizing now, I'm about to turn 39 in a few weeks, that I know some of you are saying, wow, 39. Mason asked me this summer, Dad, how long are you going to be alive? Because he's understanding death. He's been through funerals. We were at a cemetery recently, and I kind of thought about it. It's like, you know what? I didn't say this to Mason, but it's like 39 means I am statistically in the second half of my life now. And it seems really young still, but as far as life expectancy, I have less days ahead of me than I do now behind us. And all of us get to that point as you grow. Youth is this fleeting thing that you realize I have less time in front than I do behind. And certainly we don't know. I could live 60 more years. I could live 60 more days. God has our days numbered. But the point is, as you grow older and you grow out of your youth, you don't know how much time you have, but you can bank on time probably being harder. The days you have probably being harder in a lot of ways. And that's the point that Solomon is driving here, is don't waste youth on the young. Right? When you are energetic and you have a lot of things going, like, use those days to remember your Creator, because you don't know how many of them you'll have left. As the years approach, you will say, I find no pleasure in them. And this is just one of those realizations that as you grow and as you age, there's going to be a lot of difficulties you didn't have before. It reminds me of a story of my father-in-law, the one he likes to share. A long time ago, he drove a bus for the county to pick up elderly. And there's one gentleman who would often get on the bus, and he, took his cane up the steps and was trying to get up, and he'd always say to my father-in-law, they say these are the golden years, but I don't believe it. You're living in the golden years now, is what he was trying to tell him. And we're going to go through a lot of metaphors and poetry in the verses ahead that talk about the difficulties of aging. But I just want to make it clear that in no way is the scripture saying being old is bad, right? Being old is actually something that we should be revering and respecting. There's a lot that comes with age, namely wisdom that comes through experience. Proverbs 16, in fact, also written by Solomon, is one that says that gray hair is a crown of splendor. I thought I'd hear more amens from some of you this morning. But gray hair is something we should revere and respect. And at our church, that's something we're very intentional about, is having intergenerational model where the old can invest in the young. And the young can grow up in that wisdom that they can then invest in the young when they're old, and make sure that every generation is more prepared to succeed than the generation before. In no way is this implying that growing old is bad, but it's saying that life goes fast You're to live with urgency, and the days ahead might be less, and they might be harder. So remember your Creator right now, in whatever stage of life you're in, because if you're waiting for it to get easier in the future, it probably won't. It won't be easier to follow God at any time of your life. Remember him today, whatever day today is. And so these three simple words of remember your Creator come with some pretty heavy implications and instructions. This is a command. And the most important implication here of remember your Creator is that we are created by a Creator. We are created by a loving God. And that's not such a crazy statement to say in church. But there are millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in our country who do not believe that. And billions around the world that life is just a thing that happened, that we are some sort of accident in the universe, and life is all there is to life. And that we become then the biggest authority in our own life, that we are in control of every part of our life. But that's just not true. We are not in control of our life, because if we were, we would live forever. And as we'll be reading today, we don't. We don't live forever. It implies that life itself is a gift. It's a gift that God has given you, and he will give you everything you need to sustain that gift, and that we have a purpose in this life, which is to know and to remember our Creator. And that's the instruction here in these three words, is that you are to know God created you in a specific way for a specific purpose, that there is an intended order in the world. There is truth. There is a law in God, and to experience joy and fulfillment in life is to know and obey God, to trust him, to follow the path of wisdom that leads you to joy and fulfillment. To remember him is this continuous thing that day after day you walk with him. And to forget all those things, to forget your Creator, is to invite the bitterness and the unfulfillment, the dissatisfaction of life that Solomon just spent 11 chapters talking about. That is the point of all of this, is to remember your Creator and to remember him today, because you don't know for sure if tomorrow will come. It's the biggest issue we have with many, especially the young, is that, I'm just not in the stage of life to follow God. I'm going to wait until I get solidified in a career. I'm going to wait till I have the family. I'm going to wait until whatever, fill in the blank. And then once that point comes, they say, I'm just going to wait until this next thing is finished, and then I'll get serious with God. But tomorrow is never a guarantee. And if you have it, it's never a guarantee that it's going to be easier than today. Remember your Creator, because tomorrow might be more difficult than today. And that's what he's going through in these next few verses. It's the point is not just simply to live as long as possible, okay? Because if you do, then there's a string of metaphors, some poetry here to kind of describe the effects of aging. And the bottom point here is that aging is hard, okay? Aging is difficult for the most part. And I thought of an analogy that was kind of solidified yesterday. I get a text from a friend who's looking at buying a used car and asks me if I'd kind of look at it and give my perspective on it. And we can understand this analogy with cars, right? If you're looking at a car, generally speaking, less miles is good, more miles is bad, right? If you have a brand new car, you're pretty much confident that everything is going to work. You're going to turn the key, or now you push the button and it turns on. That's a really good thing. And the suspension works, and the windows work, and everything smells good and runs smooth, and you just got to top off the gas and change the oil, and it's going to work. But as miles increase, typically speaking, so do the issues. Noises appear, there's vibrations, there's smells. The thing isn't working as it should. And even if you do all of the regular maintenance things, at some point you're going to spend more time under the hood than behind the wheel, because it just breaks down over time. We can understand that. And that's what Solomon is saying about our bodies themselves, that things just don't always work as they're supposed to. We're not going to be a brand new car forever, we're going to have a lot of miles on us. And so there's this very descriptive and intentional poem that we're actually already into. This poem started after the words, "Remember your Creator." And the way it's written in the Hebrew and the way it's translated into English for most of our translations is, this is kind of like one big run-on sentence that after "remember your Creator," it should be as though you're trying to say the whole thing with one breath. And as you get through this poem, it's beginning harder and harder to say the words. You're running out of breath, and ultimately, before you get to the period in verse 5, you might just run out of breath and not finish it. And that's the way life works, right? As you go through it, it gets harder and harder to kind of make it through until ultimately you just run out of breath. And he starts in verse 2 with kind of the mental effects of aging, where he talks about the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark. And this is talking kind of about just the general spark of life, maybe your mental capacities, that after a while it gets harder and harder to remember things. It gets harder to know kind of the situational awareness. And, they say two things are true about people who grow older, right? Number one is that you will lose your memory. And number two is but this is true for anyone, right? That there's these things, and there's Alzheimer's that is prevalent in old people, and it's a very sad and difficult thing. And it ends with verse 2 of like the clouds return after the rain. It's this idea that you just got hit with a storm, and hey, look, here comes another one. And with mental facilities and as you age, it can just be kind of thing after thing after thing, and it's very hard. And it's very hard if there's someone that you love that's going through that. And it goes in verse 3 to talk about the bodily effects of age, that the keepers of the house tremble and strong men stoop. This is talking about generally the arms are seen as the keeper of the house, and so you kind of have like shaky hands and you kind of like your back is kind of hunched over. The grinders cease because they are few. It's talking about teeth, okay? And they didn't have dentures. They didn't have toothbrushing or dental care. When your teeth fell out, they just fell out, right? And then those looking through the windows grow dim. It's talking about your eyes. And even today, 50% of people over 80 develop cataracts or need cataract surgery. Like poor vision is just part of aging. And so nothing lasts forever. In verse 4, it goes on to talk about kind of your interaction with the world and how that changes too. That the doors close to the street, and this idea that you become more and more homebound or bedridden. That the sound of grinding fades. This isn't talking about your teeth anymore. Not saying you're a quieter eater. The word for grinding here is talking about people kind of going about their busy days, right? Grinding their seeds at the mill, and it's this idea of this just hustle and bustle of life, and now as you grow, you get more and more isolated from the hum of daily life. And that is another sad part about aging, and why I would encourage you all, like if you have a loved one at a nursing home, to visit them and make sure they have community, because it's very sad to see elderly isolated and grow alone. But also on top of that, there's this idea of they rise up at the sound of birds. It's this sense that you don't sleep as well. You become a very light sleeper, that the slightest thing will wake you up. But then the tragedy is you can't even really hear the birds singing anymore. And the songs grow faint. The interaction with the world changes tremendously along with the body that we've been talking about. And then verse 5, as we're closing this out, he's talking about the personal, emotional, relational changes to age, that people are afraid of heights and dangers in the street. And it's this general idea you're not as bold as you used to be. As you age, you're not likely to go climb a mountain or hop on a plane and go to the conference in Nashville for the weekend. Things kind of slow down. And there's not as much boldness and drive as there used to be. The almond tree blossoms. Now, almond trees blossom with silver or white flowers. This is talking about your hair graying, which, as we said, is a crown of glory. That's a good thing. But it is a change that the grasshopper drags itself. This is talking about bad knees or bad back, and it's harder to kind of get around and be mobile. And then it ends with desire is no longer stirred. Now, this can be interpreted a couple of different ways, both of which are true. Directly, this is saying the caperberry has lost its effect. And in this time, the caperberry was used as something to kind of elicit desire for life, like with eating. It's also seen as an aphrodisiac. And so you can kind of fill in the blank here of what he's talking about. And as they say, the libido is the last to go. But there's no desire for life. There's no desire for relation with your spouse. And then he puts a period after that. And then he starts with this next thing that I think is a really important part of aging, a really real part of aging, is that people go to their eternal home and mourners go about the street. And this could be talking about us individually, but I think it's also saying in this phase of life, when you grow old, you go to a lot of funerals. A lot of your friends and your families are passing away. Everyone you know starts to die, and it's a very sad time of life as well. There's someone that was interviewed, a woman that was 104 years old, and she was asked, what are the complications you're experiencing as 100? What are the difficulties of being 104? And of course, she listed a lot of things that were listed here. And then she was asked, what are the benefits of being 104? And she said, there's no peer pressure. And of course, she's bringing humor to a real situation, is that there's really no one her age anymore. And everyone she knows, all of her peers, are gone. And it makes death really real to us. And you realize there's just not much time left the older you get. And all of this is to show an important point to us, that life itself is a gift, but it is not forever. At some point, you realize that things are slowing down, troubles are increasing, and there's an increasing sense that not much time is left. And death becomes inevitable. And that's the last point here. All of this, by the way, is not written as this morbid statement where we're supposed to go and feel bad about life for the rest of the day. It's meant to be a sobering statement to help us to understand what life really is. In this state of the world, it is temporary, and death waits for no one. Now, we don't like to think about death. Okay, we don't love to talk about death, but it's an important part of understanding life. All of us are going to face death one day. There's just a few biblical exceptions to that. Throughout the New Testament, and in the Old Testament too, but especially in the New Testament, there's a number of resurrections, right, where people kind of cheated death, at least for a bit. The most popular is Lazarus and the daughter of Jairus. You have people raising from the ground at the resurrection of Jesus. And probably my favorite, because it's kind of a humorous way to talk about resurrection, is when Paul was speaking about Jesus all night in this tower, and this boy falls out of a window because he falls asleep. Like, Paul goes down and resurrects him and is like, not so fast. No, you're not going to get out of this one. And he brings him back up and talks about Jesus for the rest of the night. But there's these things that happen, but in every single one of these cases, it really wasn't a resurrection. They all experienced death. They were resuscitated back to life, and then they died again. Even in those miraculous moments, they didn't escape death. We know that Enoch and Elijah didn't physically die. They were taken up to heaven through different means, and it's kind of a mysterious thing, but those are the only two examples we know. Even Jesus himself did not escape death. Okay, he died, and then he conquered death. Hallelujah, right? But he's the only one that's ultimately conquered death. And thank God he did. The only way we could possibly avoid death is if Jesus comes back before we die. And it's possible, but we don't know that. Okay, we all have to face the reality of death. And that's the whole point of all of this, is death is really inevitable. It can and should happen, and you should have some level of peace with death. And if you don't, it's because you don't know the Creator, because you don't have peace with God. That's the urgency that Solomon is kind of closing this whole argument with is, you know what? There's a lot of things in life that are going to get you, that are going to make you feel good and make you feel bad and all that, but ultimately none of it matters because you will die one day. And if you're not at peace with that, then there is a problem you need to sort out. Remember him before it's too late, is what he's saying. Before the silver cord is severed, the golden bowl is broken. And this could be talking about something ceremonial. It could be talking about something in people's homes. But the idea is that this golden bowl, this precious thing, is cut from a cord and it shatters, right? And it's not like this Humpty Dumpty, let's put it back together. It's saying like there's nothing we can do. When it's broken, it's broken. When we die, we die. That the pitcher is shattered and the wheel is broken. And this is talking about no, we're no longer going to be drinking of life anymore. And this dust, we're made from dust, and this is going back to the Genesis creation. We're going to go back to the ground where we came from. And the spirit that God breathed into us will return to him. And this is kind of written about without a lot of details. Those are filled in the New Testament. The spirit will return to God either for judgment or glorification. And the difference between those two is Jesus, and we know that. But at some point, we will die. And we see this poem kind of go in this natural track. There's no plot twist here. It ended as we all knew it would. It ends with death being inevitable. It's something we'll face. And it's interesting when you look at how death is written about in the Bible. Nothing has changed. Even over 3,000 years, in Psalm 90, it says, our days might come to 70, maybe 80 if we're strong. It's basically the same life expectancy that we're looking at today. There's no guarantee of any amount of life. But until Jesus comes back, we are guaranteed death. It's not meant to be morbid. It's not meant to be sad. It's meant to be sobering. If you are a believer, you should have peace with death because you have peace with God. And if you want peace with death, the only way to find peace with God is through Jesus. And if you don't remember your Creator, if you don't know Jesus, then what's the point of all of this? If all you do is live and die. What's the point? And that's where we get to in this last verse. It's the same words he used to start the whole book is what he kind of ends his final argument with here before we close next week on the book. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And he's talking about this from the perspective of someone who doesn't remember their Creator, someone who doesn't know God, someone who doesn't have faith in Jesus and has no peace through life, no peace with death. And that's what I want to focus on as we close today here, is if there is no Creator, if there's no God, and again, hundreds of millions of people live this way in our own country, that there's nothing. All there is to life is life. And you're here to have a few laughs. You're here to have a few tears. You have some loved ones, and you live in a house together. And then before long, you die, and everyone you know will die. And then you just go in the ground, and it's all over. And what Solomon says earlier in this book is eventually the whole world will go on without you and forget you. Without God, that's true. So what's the point? If you don't remember your Creator, if you don't know God, what's the point of any of it? It really ends up being that we're just all part of this cosmic joke of which we are the punchline. It's meaningless. If you don't know God, what's the point? And especially if you don't know God, there's no such thing as peace with death. Death should be feared above all things. Right? If you don't know God, if you don't remember your Creator, and life is just life and then you die, then you shouldn't laugh, okay? You shouldn't sleep. Food shouldn't taste good. What's the point? All of it is meaningless. It's depressing. It's futile. It's vanity. And that's the real point that Solomon has been building up to at this point. This is the last exclamation point before the period next week. Without God at the center of your life, There is no point. What's the point without God? None. You live, you die, and the world moves on. This is the exclamation point to drive home the command he started with today. Remember God. Remember your Creator. Know him, trust him, love him, worship him, follow him before it's too late. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow, you might say. Today might be all you have. Remember your Creator before it's too late. And you need to remember that as we go into the final point next week. This is the backdrop that he really concludes the matter with. And we'll get there, but I want to maybe make this point as easy as possible for anyone here today who's struggling with this. God is your Creator. He created you on purpose and with purpose. And the greatest thing you can do in life is to know him and to love him and to worship him and to obey him. Through that one effort, as the starting point of any kind of joy and fulfillment and meaning you can find in this life, is to know that God knows you, he loves you, and he desires you. And with that, you have to trust him to know that he will forgive you. He will transform you. He will redeem you. And so today, of any day, is the day to remember him. Let's close in prayer today. God, we want to thank you for your love for us and that you call us according to your purposes and mercy and grace, that God, none of us deserve you. None of us deserve to be in your presence. None of us deserve to be forgiven by you. None of us deserve to even be here at all. None of us deserve life. And we never asked for it. We never begged you for it, but you gave it to us as a gift, God. And that's what we have to view it as a gift from our Creator. So Lord, I pray today that is not another day that we just waste looking forward to tomorrow, but know that today is today. It's a day that you have given us to rejoice in you, to be glad in it. So God, I pray that today as we go on from here, that we don't just go back to our busy lives and our routine schedules and the things of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, but God, we understand that you are the eternal God here forever. And that is our purpose, is to remember you, the eternal, loving, and benevolent Creator over all things. So God, I pray that no matter what that means in our own lives, no matter how we apply that to ourselves, that we would just do it. That we would understand what that means, and we would do that. And know that you are on the other side, waiting with open arms for us, wanting to love us and change us and work with us where we're at. But God, I just pray that we can live with that sense of urgency and know that we might be here for a few thousand days, tens of thousands of days, but that's it. That's our life here. And God, help us to have purpose and meaning and value in it, all rooted in knowing and remembering you. And we pray these things now in your name, Jesus. Amen.